Tuolla Lontoossa Jönnin mä kohtasin. Hallo Väpi, oho. Hän on neidosten joukossa kaunihin. Hallo Väpi, oho.
Welcome again to another bunch of adventures with the Gloucester Bookies, people who write or read books, recommend them, take them from the library, and sometimes purchase them, I suppose.
Purchase them.
That.
Sometimes illustrate them.
Illustrate them. Well, that's that. And in fact, we will start shortly with Susanna Natty, who is the illustrator of umpteen books, and can tell us about that. And also, I'm going to ask her if... Dorothy, somebody's calling immediately to ask us about books. All right, we'll have to put them off for a minute. But in the meantime, we're going to ask, I did have a question for Susanna to tell us, if she wrote books, she illustrates books, if she wrote books, what books she might, or subjects she might choose to write about, if she did. And that'll be later. But hold on to that thought. Meanwhile, first, I should introduce around the table George Rosen, who's here today, happily. Susanna Natty, both from relatively northern Gloucester. Then we get into the more closer to the harbor with Laura Ventimiglia and Wayne Sawney. We have a chance today to hear from Susanna first. So we will. Please, here's Susanna.
Okay, well, every once in a while we actually have kind of a discussion about what we might be talking about at one of these things, as opposed to when we completely wing it. So Wayne had proposed that we talk about writing, and I wrote to him and said, well, I'm not really a writer, so I'm not too sure what I can offer. He said, aha, let me pose you a question, which is, if you were to write something, what would it be? Well, that turned out to be really quite confounding. I thought about it for a while because I immediately get sort of like caught up in, well, what is a writer? We could dig that into a really deep rabbit hole. So I'm just going to say that I like to write, but I'm not a writer. My mother was a writer. My two daughters are writers. But I sort of staked out some different territory. But if I had to answer that question, I think I would want to do something that I would find personally entertaining to myself, since I'm not a serious writer. I actually did participate in this thing called NaNoWriMo about 7 years ago. It sounds like Wayne knows it. It's NaNoWriMo stands for National November Writing Month. And it was cooked up by a couple of guys, I don't know, a few decades ago. And it's just kind of like, you can participate in this on a lark. The only requirement is that you write 50,000 words. You could write the.
In 1 month.
In 1 month. So my daughter Kate had done it. She called up and announced, hey, I've just written a novel. And I thought, oh, how marvelous. And then she told me what it was all about. And I thought, I want to do that next year too. So I set myself a certain number of words to accomplish every day. I had sort of a plot in mind. As it turns out, when I reread this a couple months ago, the plot had a few serious problems in it. But what I found was, and I'm sure the real writers in this group know this, that once I got into sort of developing the characters, it got really fun. They took me places I had not predicted. The guy I thought was going to be the hero turned out to be a real curmudgeon. He was sort of curmudgeonly hero. And then the villain really wasn't a villain at all, but sort of a hapless guy who kind of backed into committing a felony. Everything comes together at the end, and I found myself laughing out loud at some of the passages. So I thought, okay, it was really, really fun. So if I were to write a book, I would do something like that, some kind of like Agatha Christie or Sharon Cook, mystery novel with a lot of comic relief. And if I were to do a children's book, which I actually have no desire to do, since I did that for so many years on the illustration end, I did have an idea a couple months ago when I was observing one of my granddaughters, and she was very distressed about having made a mistake. And I thought, how could I make an entertaining and funny book for her that would give her a nice sort of message without being a message. I really don't like message books for kids. I like it when the story is what they take in and then they remember that later with whatever values you've instilled in it. I've sort of thought about that, but having dealt with the really, truly joyful career I had, I have no desire to illustrate another book. So thank you for that question, Wayne. And I do want to turn the tables on you if we have time, which is if you were an illustrator, what would you illustrate, or if you were an artist, what would you do?
I'll answer it in a funny way because it's astonishing sometimes the coincidences that are out there. I just learned about a book that came out only a couple of weeks ago. I got a copy that I'm going to give to you because it's the reverse, just what you asked. There's a writer in Britain named Nicholson Baker, and he's written bestsellers.
Nicholson Baker.
He's been around for a while.
Oh.
And this is a sketch, recent sketch on the cover of Nicholson Baker by Nicholson Baker. It's a self-portrait. I think there's a dog in there too. Is the picture of an artist as an old man.
Is he an old man now?
Well, he's got a gray beard,
Yeah.
I'm guessing. And the title is Finding a Likeness. It is available at the
library?
Free Library. And Finding a Likeness. And the British-sounding subtitle is How I Got Somewhat Better at Art.
That's perfect.
Now, most of admittedly, and this is why it's so instructive, most of this copiously illustrated, minimally texted book, it's visual, are other people's art.
Wow.
That he studied. Including under their, if they were living at the, when they give a seminar or something, he would go. And he became proficient from practice. He sketched for a couple of years. Seems to me he did it backwards. And I'll ask you, so he's a writer, what you said, if you're a writer and then if you wanted to go into art, but you didn't know anything about art, you still tried. He started with oil painting. Found it
a challenging place to start.
A bad place to start. And he ended up with pencil drawing. In fact, in colored, as well as colored pencil.
He's American.
Oh, he's American.
Yes,
Good, thank you.
Well,
I was all set to say Nicholson Baker.
I think he's now probably American citizen. But if you check, the reason I know this, there's a story, not in this, but someone else told about him. Nicholson Baker. People out there, have you ever, Gloucester, we're full of it. I know I did this. Have you ever taken a bottle or a can or something and thrown it, made a message, message in a bottle kind of thing, and thrown it into the Mill River, or which I did, or the harbor, and hoped that someone would
Find it?
Yeah.
On the other side of the world.
On the other side of the world. Anybody do that? I did that. Some people in Gloucester.
I did it in the quarry, but it never went anywhere.
I was supposed to say that.
Yeah,
shot yourself in the foot.
Blood legend.
I used to look for them, and I never found them.
Oh, no.
I look. I mean, occasionally here, and even where I grew up, in the Midwest, near Lake Michigan, there's still junk in the water, and there were bottles, but
different kinds of
Never with a
bottles.
message.
Never with a message.
But here's the deal: Nicholson Baker in Britain. I don't know why. Maybe his father was in the Air Force, or but whatever it was, Nicholson.
Born in New York City, went to
Okay.
Haverford.
Take
This is modern technology.
take the story as given. He's 10 years old, and he's in maybe on tourist holiday. So he throws the bottle with a message into the waters, and it goes across the Atlantic. He's hoping to go around the world and end up in China. It didn't. It went from England, where he threw it into the waters, and across the Atlantic, and it was picked up in New York by Harrison, I've forgotten his last name, who was the editor of the New York Times. The editor of the New York Times got this message in a bottle from the kid. So, of course, it had the address and mail me back and say hello. And he did. It's New York Times stationery, and it's very nice to the 10-year-old kid. Maybe it was 11 by, some 6. And he got this letter from this New York Times editor, and he's 10 or 11. And he wrote back. And the correspondence developed. They're writing back and forth for many years.
Fantastic.
The beginning of his writing career.
It was no doubt helped in that manner. I mean, how could you resist? If you're the editor of the New York Times and then somebody writes a book and they say, that's that kid with the bottle. Oh,
yeah.
I've got to give him a review so it happens. Anyway. Meanwhile, this is finding a likeness is his finding his way toward a meaningful kind of a painting that satisfied him.
Wow.
Because it didn't start out that way. It was a long struggle. So there's a behind the scenes progress that you can follow if you keep through the book. And also it encourages people who are reading to branch out as he did, even after success in other fields, to try their luck with art, because it might end up quite in a different way than usual, satisfying to them. So I'm answering this in an odd way, this question, and I'm going to offer you this heavy book to take home.
Oh
as
my
a
goodness,
prize.
Wayne!
It's
I
copiously
can't
illustrated,
wait
so
to get into
that's-
it. What? I mean, I've been looking at Wayne flipping through these pages, and I am really looking forward to exploring this. Thank you.
Well,
Great, finding a likeness.
knowing
try
Susanna,
it too.
where she goes through these
Yeah.
pictures, paintings, artwork, she's going to say, "Oh, I remember that," because it's going to look familiar, and you have studied it already. But that's okay.
Very cool.
It's still good selections, and you'll be able to judge that.
Well, she does write multimedia things, which are her Christmas cards, which she's been doing for years, and which are text and illustrations. They're nonfiction. I mean,
It is nonfiction. It's
yes,
true.
they're not. They're imaginative tales of what has happened in her family over the past year, but they're grounded in truth.
Based on fact.
Based on
Totally
fact.
based-
I love it.
Based on fact. And, you could write a whole book
Yeah, well, I've kept all of them.
like that.
I could have an anthology.
That's
Christmas
true, too.
letters.
Then you would
Put
have
them
to
all
do anything.
together.
Right. That's sort of my thought.
Yeah.
Not have to do anything.
Christmas letters, then it would already be illustrated.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
can do that. But what's interesting to me is there are more and more people who are writing. They're usually coming from the illustrator. The visual artists who are writing books. I have a niece-in-law, if that's a term.
That's a,
It is a
you
term.
just made it up, but I think it's good.
Yeah, she's married to my nephew.
It works.
Her name is Lauren Redness, and she's written. She's won the National Book Award and all sorts of things. She's really quite well known. I think I don't know if it was her first, but at least one of the early ones is called Radioactive, and it was story, an account of Marie Curie and her husband and her lover or her later husband. It's a little obscure in there, but it is, she literally wrote it herself because she usually writes where she writes out text
Longhand?
longhand.
Oh, that's a lost art.
And also has it illustrated. He's
Wow.
is originally an artist and stuff, and that was wildly successful and made into a movie, actually,
Oh my
which I have not
goodness!
seen.
What a roaring success! And what is her name again?
Lauren Redness, Rediss.
Redn.
Another name
ISS.
for us
Redness,
to look
Lauren
up.
Redness.
And
See if
she
her
Wonderful.
book-
also she wrote a book called Weather. It's all about weather,
Gee.
lightning and storms and mixes of her own autobiographical experience of weather and art, but also illustrated by her. And it's never occurred to me to do that. I'm not a
But we
visual artist,
talk about
but I'm a
those.
very good photographer. And in college, I wrote my honors thesis on collaborations between writers and photographers in the 1930s. And there were sort of classic one is James A.
Oh wow.
Walker Evans' book, Let Us Now Pray as Famous Men. And that's a chunk of photographs, a long chunk, I mean about pages, photographs followed by hundreds of pages of text. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. But there were also Margaret Bourke White and Erskine Caldwell
Yeah.
put a book together. And it's never occurred to me to actually write a book with photographs, particularly fiction, but one could.
One could, and
One-
one
one-
should try.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
You have the photos already, right?
Well, I mean, if
Yes.
it's fiction, I can do that. Yeah, sure.
Hey, listen, if it's fiction, you could Photoshop. Oh, or you could do collage with it. Really get your creative juices going with the
going.
glue.
Yeah, so you can do all sorts of things in that. There's also
Amazing.
a wonderful, very strange book which kind of has some illustrations in it by the author, and his last name is McDermott, and he's a Scot. And it's a book about someone who essentially goes into the afterlife, which is or is not hell. It's not clear exactly how labeled this particular afterlife is, except it's Glasgow in the rain.
That sounds like hell.
It goes on for pages and pages. At one point, the guy flies down to England, the dead person probably, and England, I think, is filled with souls who have passed on, but it's sunnier there. But they're not always good people either. And it's just an astounding book. I'll try and again, modern technology. I'll try and remember the
Yes.
title of it.
Yes.
But he's a writer who is a very good artist, and he has all these things
Wow.
kind of. I mean, they're not illustrating scenes. They're kind of just things that are sort of created out of his head, which he thinks
Yeah.
are relevant to it. And
So it's
I
really
I don't know why I never thought, or someone hasn't. Lots of people don't think of this. I mean, I grew up. I'm not a great fan of Jamie Wyeth or Andrew Wyeth, but I'm an astounding fan of Nathaniel Wyeth.
Oh, wait, who's Nathaniel
He's
Wyeth?
the grandfather.
Oh, NC.
NC.
Wyeth.
And
Illustrator
and
of
he
Treasure
illustrated
Island.
Robin Hood
Yes.
Yeah.
and all
Oh.
these wonderful,
The
books
Yearling
for
and Treasure Island.
Yeah,
and
just spectacular.
you've unleashed a
things.
torrent.
Yeah. Oh, it's easy.
He
isn't it?
he was being an illustrator there in the,
Yes.
in the standard.
Yeah.
George, while you're looking that up, let me say this about that. There's a Dickens story that I recall before he became famous, when he was first introduced to writing. Someone had a batch of sporting pictures. In other words, those people out hunting, fox hunting, and this kind of thing. And the wonderful illustrator who was very popular, Cruikshank, I think is.
Oh, yeah. Thomas
But-
Cruikshank.
In any case, the publisher had these pictures, but he didn't have a book. So he asked Dickens, "You've got an imagination. can you look at the pictures and think of a story that goes with all this? And that was part of the Pickwick paper.
Oh my goodness!
wow.
Listen,
So-
my mother
So
had.
the pictures came before the,
Story.
yeah.
This happened to my mother early in her career. Some illustrations came in to a book. I hope I'm telling the story right, but I do remember her saying this. And they didn't love the story at the publishing company, but they did love the illustrations,
Yeah.
and they asked my mother to
Yeah.
reimagine what the illustrations were about. It really goes back and forth, this
Did
creative
they
thing.
have another author put the different
I don't
stories?
remember that part of the story, and
That would be a
and-
happy
And I should try to know, because it's an unhappy story for somebody.
Well,
Right.
Yeah,
Right, right.
whoever
Whoever wrote it first.
So I don't know. It was early on. I was at that stage where I didn't really listen to what my mother was telling me, and now I can't ask her. So it's a mystery.
You got it.
I'll
You
Google
got
it.
I remember a.
Yeah, it was Cruikshank. And,
Oh, you got Cruikshank on
well,
there.
well, it was before they did the Pickwick papers together. I mean, this very first thing were shorter pieces which Dickens wrote, and they were called sketches. Sketches by Boz.
Boz.
By
B-O-Z.
Boz.
Yeah.
And I don't know when sketches,
Became,
well, yeah, I mean, you can still write, you can still have a short sketch, write and stuff, but I was wondering if it was always, even if the idea of the text at that point was, this is a sketch,
Right.
in our visual artistic
Right.
sense, which I'll do, but use words.
That's an interesting thing, the word sketch, because there are sketches in theater.
Oh,
and so,
sure,
like,
yeah,
all
the
these
comic sketches.
Yeah,
and-
that's right.
Sure.
It's just something half done.
I think that's the idea. Related to scratch. I mean, when you just start kind of,
very good.
put something
my
out
God.
there. Still haven't found the
Right.
name of
Right,
it now, but I'm going to get, this is bothering, because this is one of my favorite books to recommend to people.
Well,
All right.
and I
you,
never,
search.
and I've forgotten the name of it.
you will surely find it. And meanwhile,
Switch the camera.
spin off to questions and answers for Laura, because I see, as usual, she's well versed in
Not well
books about writing, and these are inevitably available in the library. So please tell us about this, and people can possibly learn something about writing from you. But also, if they wanted to pursue it further, they can go to the sections of Sawyer Free Library. Tell us about it, Laura.
So, well, what I have to say won't be nearly as interesting
Oh.
or engaging.
What a
Let's
down-
have it. Come on, Laura.
what a downer. What downbeat.
No, really.
Yeah.
But,
I got to play the violin over here.
no,
She
I
said-
know. Oh, yeah, sure. Go ahead. But the real writer, in my estimation, here is Wayne, that's in this room, because as Wayne reads some of my stuff, like, well, go get this book. You don't have to buy the whole book, but just read this page. So over the years, I've accumulated a few books based on Wayne's and other people's suggestions, but this is one, general writing advice.
Gentle writing
Gentle,
advice.
yes, gentle.
Nothing harsh.
No, nothing harsh, and as opposed to being harsh. And the thing I liked about this book was it was a fun, light read. It was really kind of fun, and it helped me feel good about what I was writing and how I was writing. What I do or how I do, and whether it's important. And one of the times that I was on a session here with you, you did read an excerpt from the book, so I thought I would.
Oh,
read.
good.
I
Please.
thought I would read this. So, and this is by Chuck Wendy. Saying that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Wendy.
All right. So I think we need your voice. Should you care to share it? Because your voice has value. Your art, your words have worth. They are worth it to you and to the world beyond. So if you're going to do this thing, there are ways to do it that don't require you breaking your back and bleeding and starving and smashing your nose against the grindstone so hard it turns to a pink paste.
Like that. I get that image.
You got that? And then he says, the truth is that writing is squiggly, fiddly, wiggly thing. It's not IKEA furniture.
Yeah.
You don't just assemble the pieces of pressed particle board and use an Allen wrench number 479 to connect it all, and ta-da, you've built a spoon. Art is fire and chaos. Stories have patterns, but few guaranteed formulas. You can't just plug and play. This isn't an equation in search of solved variables. So what worked for me won't work for you. I mean, what he was getting at in the book was a lot of people write books for advice on how to write, and it's, rule 1, rule 2, you do this, you do this, you do that. And what he was saying is, in a really lighthearted way, do what works for you and don't worry about anything else.
Right.
So that sort of gave me the it was like a feel good book.
Yeah.
Nice one.
You like that?
You remember?
Well
remind
titled.
me
Yeah.
of a time I was with other people. We were listening to an author, a real author, who not me, and I was telling us about somebody raised a hand. What's the difference between tone, voice, style, some other different words? And the author said, I never forget your voice is what you bring to the party.
Oh, I like that.
Voice is what you bring to the party.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's good.
Yeah.
All
right, so this one, everybody probably knows this one, Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. And so this motivated me to write shit, because she makes a point of saying everybody's first draft it's a shitty first draft.
Oh, wow.
When you write,
I think that was Hemingway said.
Oh, Hemingway said, well, then she must have repeated it from him, or maybe she put her own little twist on it. But she also, in a very lighthearted way, it was a fun read. Both of these books were a fun read. But sure. But what Anne Lamott did in her writing was she affirmed for me what I was doing, what I was writing, and what my habits were. And she brought me to the point where I started to think consciously about how I write, what my process is, and why I use that kind of a process. So I thought that was really, and again, another fun read.
But talk more about habits. I mean, what were you seeing as your habits? And did you want to correct them or use them?
Well, so that's a really good question, because I was feeling like, well, I'm not a real author or writer, because I don't get up every morning at 6 o'clock and write for an hour or for 2 hours. I don't do the things, for example, that Olin Butler suggests you do. Although it's a great resource. But I was just feeling as though maybe I wasn't a serious writer, because I would write, and I wouldn't say when I would write when I had inspiration, because when I'm working on something, I feel like it's 24/7, and it could be 3 o'clock in the morning that I'm writing, or it could be 10 o'clock at night, or 6 o'clock in the morning. So one of the things I tend to do is read what I'm working on before I go to bed, and then let it settle, or let it, move around, or play with it while I'm sleeping, totally, of course, not thinking of it. And then I can get up in the morning and go. And sometimes I write for 20 minutes, sometimes an hour, and sometimes 2 hours. And then other times, when it's like 9 or 9:30, I'm getting ready for bed. Let me read for tomorrow. Let me read, think about it. I'll read, and I'll start writing right away. So I can start reading what I'm working on, and then write till 11 or 12 or 1 in the morning. And then if I get up because I can't sleep, something's woken me up during the night. I do a lot of work in the middle of the night, too.
Yeah. One thing I did, and other past, I taught fiction workshops at Tufts. One of the things I recommended, because it had worked for me, was to stop in the middle of something when you're done. I mean, there was in fact a point novel, which my only novel, as opposed to stories, which published. I wrote when I was
Black Gold.
Black Money.
Black Money.
Black Money.
Yeah.
I wrote
Black Money.
I said I was going to write 500 words a day, 2 type pages. pages.
Yeah, I
Remember
remember, yeah.
typewriters?
I also write by hand.
Yeah.
And I would stop right in the
Really?
middle. And actually, I saw after I didn't done this 15, 20 years, Hemingway, in fact, recommends it at some point, that you just
Right.
cut off.
Yeah.
So don't have to
Yeah,
go through all that
That's right.
effort
Right.
to start again in the morning. You're in the middle of
Of
something.
something.
You're right in the middle
Yeah.
of something.
You don't have the startup friction. You've got it already
Sure.
rolling.
Rolling, yeah.
And it makes a great deal of sense.
Yeah.
This book this is on the Ian Lamott book that you read. I just want to quote. Her father was a used car salesman or something, and he decided to write a book, and he actually got a book published, first of a long series he wrote. And I'm just going to say how excited she was when.
Now, I just want you to notice, this isn't a page I've marked up. It's not, and he went right to this. Wayne?
Here it is. That night, before we went to sleep, I picked up the new novel and began to read the first page to my friend, which is his girlfriend who was sleeping over. We were lying side by side in sleeping bags on my floor. The first page turned out to be about a man and a woman having sex. The man. I began to giggle with mounting hysteria. Oh, this is great, I thought, beaming at my friend. I covered my mouth with one hand like blushing Charlie Chaplin, pantomimed that I was about to toss the book over my shoulder. This is wonderful, I thought, throwing back my head to laugh jovially. My father writes pornography. And he wrote like 100 or something. When she came to his, when he died, you look at the estate or what's the stuff in his library. He'd written like 100. So she had a predecessor in writing.
Boy.
Anyway, go.
Okay,
Talk
so-
about a voice. I mean, she's
Oh
got
my
such a
God,
funny
she
voice.
does.
I gotta
She
check
does.
in with George. Did you find the?
Good check.
The
Who is?
I was thinking his last name was McDermott because I knew someone named Alistair McDermott, but actually his first name is Alistair, E-A-L, very
that changes
Scott.
everything.
Yeah, and his last name is Gray. His name is Alistair Gray, and the book's called Lanark.
Lanark.
I know
it's,
that
it's indescribable. I mean, some people have called it science fiction, but it's not really science fiction, or there's no science at all, actually. I mean, it's
But it's
a
Glasgow on
fantasy.
steroids.
Yeah, it's spectacular. It's a really wonderful book.
Great.
Gray with an A or an E?
Guy over there. I mean, we have been in a brief communication about a friend of the late wife, Susie's first name is Gray with E.
Yeah. Very cool name.
And but his last name is Gray. He's they're British American versions of Gray.
The only way I remember American versus English version is A is America, so Gray.
Oh,
And England
good
is
mnemonic.
A, Grey. That's the
Oh,
only
I
way I
know.
remember.
But this guy,
Oh,
but
yeah.
he's British,
But he's
and his
using-
last name is Gray.
So it-
Gray.
I'm totally screwed up.
Yeah,
with it.
so,
Well, go on.
I
And we
want
just-
you want my comments about your hero, Olin Butler?
Yes,
Oh, yeah, please. Let's get to Owen.
he's a
Butler.
Pulitzer Prize winning seminar. If you look on YouTube, he's done a 13-part series, 1 hour each, on writing a story as you watch.
Writing
You're kidding.
as
while
you
you
watch
watch
you
him
watch him.
talking about
Real
it.
time.
And
He's
it's on YouTube.
He's typing it,
Okay.
and when he makes
Wow.
a change, he does it on the screen.
Oh, so you
so
actually are
he's
seeing
writing.
what
You-
he's writing.
You see what he's writing. He didn't know if it would be successful or not. And I think on YouTube, it has already gotten 50 viewers.
Well, tonight it will
Including
have
you.
four more.
Yes.
Right.
Wow,
Four
that's
more.
fascinating. Gee, I gotta see that.
But anyway, this
So
is the guy.
This is the guy.
Right
This is I call him your hero. So From Where You Dream by Olin Butler, Robert Olin Butler. This is a very dense read. This is not a fun read.
Okay.
And actually,
tell how it
he
was-
didn't write it. He yeah.
Right.
So he had a student. Was teaching writing. He still, I guess,
Yeah.
teaches. He had a student who wanted to interview him and work on a book with him about how to write, like basic. And Olin Butler said, "No, I'm not going to do that." And so he allowed the student, who was a previous student, to now sit in his class again and take notes. And so the book is based on his course, and all the student did was put it together, like edit it and move it around and make sense out of it. But it's basically, you're reading the course as he's teaching it.
Yes.
And and one of the things I like about it is that it helped me to be more deliberate in my writing. So for a week I get up and I wrote every hour, every day for an hour, and then I said, this isn't working. And I did some of the other, writing exercises that he suggested and so forth. But it's a deeper look and engaging your thoughts about writing and what you're doing. And again, so it was really helpful. So
you guys out there that don't know it, this isn't a spoiler to say this. It's in the book early. He wrote about 5 novels before he realized a different method. And what he realized was that it was coming from everything he was writing was coming from his head as he was thinking of the style and what it would look like and other people reading it and so forth. That wasn't the right way to write for him. He said it's got to come from inside your muse, your subconscious, where you dream. What is it called?
Dream
From
space.
where you
the title
dream.
is From Where You Dream, but
So-
what he suggests is
so you
don't wait.
see.
Yeah, don't wait for inspiration.
Yeah.
What he says is you create a dream space.
Right.
And then you brainstorm. You don't brainstorm and
Right.
you're doing all this
Right.
other
You
stuff.
have to invite it in.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
part of that inviting it in is writing every day for an hour, 2 hours.
Yeah, but you have to be willing to toss.
Yes,
And that gets
right.
back to the shit
Yeah.
issue. And I mean, I once was writing some fairly serious, some stories, had a sign above my desk that said, if we don't like it, we can always do it all over. Lenin. But, and that I found liberating, of just saying, you can always toss things.
Yes.
And,
George, my recollection is one of your short stories, serious short stories, was, see how people can use it. You used Gloucester's clam flats as a setting, a part of an important scene in your short story. Imagine people can use clam flats. Can you remember other parts of Gloucester you used besides clam flats?
that is the only story I have written is set in a Gloucester-like place. Yeah, I mean, it's not specifically. But it's definitely Gloucester.
Yeah. Okay.
But because there are kernels. And this has to do with dream space. I think that occur to writers, me, where all of a sudden you see something, or you think of something which is not a story. It's just a thing.
Yeah.
And but then you can pursue it without having ABC 1A 2A and stuff like that. I mean, this is for fiction, but it can also in some ways work for nonfiction too. I mean, if you're having a general subject, some particular detail or thing leaps out at before I knew what folks do here.
What do we do?
I was thinking of books I would like to recommend, and there's
That will be the next time. Well, we are recommending. I mean, we are all recommended as we talk about things,
and
right?
There's a British writer named Penelope Fitzgerald. I first heard of there were these long read something. Guy, I was in the Peace Corps, Kenya, 50 years ago, came 30 years ago, or maybe 25 years ago, to Boston to row in one of the head of the Charles regattas. He, it turns out, is a professor of English at Oregon, University of Oregon, something like that. And but he was also a hotshot shell rower at Stanford, something. But I said, what was he reading? He said the only new thing he was reading was Fitzgerald. Penelope Fitzgerald, this is the main thing, was already 50 to 60 when I heard about her. She published her first novel 60. She had, I mean, she was a writer, but in English in a class. She was also doing editing stuff for Encyclopedia Britannica and things like this. But she started writing, and she was Booker Prize and everything else. She's a spectacular writer. But the one I was thinking, one book for her, something called Gate of Angels. And it starts obviously with something what she started, which is it's 1911. Guy on a bicycle in Oxford is riding along, crashes into a woman. They're both not paying any attention. They wake up in bed together, hospital, because some good Samaritan who came along and saw these two unconscious people, it's sort of in an embrace, figured they must be a married couple. So they get sent off to the hospital and they wake up together.
Yeah.
And I don't even remember the details of what the 200-page novel that follows is, but it obviously just started with that.
Yeah.
And rather than just thinking, oh, that's a silly idea or something like that, just kind of wrote that out and then started going to the next, discovering with the next paragraph what she was going to say. And they read like that. I mean, some books are very carefully plotted and stuff, and this one isn't. And then the ghost comes because she always has ghost stories. And I think it's, kind of you sit down, you're writing some longer thing, and instead of saying, oh, here's a ghost story, well, I'll set that aside to be the ghost story, she puts the ghost story into the story somehow, and it's just wonderful. So, you don't know what's going to happen. Are you real? It's not a thriller, but you have absolutely no idea what's going to happen.
So that sounds like how Olin Butler writes.
Well, he's all over the map. I mean, he writes
different things.
He wrote a realistic novel about Vietnam and some others, and a book called Hell. Just called Hell.
Yeah.
And it's set in
Hell.
And
Glasgow. No, I'm only kidding. Please don't.
But the interesting thing is, he was able to, I think, vent or use all his hatreds and things and stuff and punish people that he didn't. He didn't like Nixon. Didn't like President Nixon. So President Nixon is pictured in this novel, Hell, in a presidential limousine with all the, a chauffeur, and he's in back, and the windows are drawn up, but there's no air conditioning. No air conditioning. And
that's what Dante's Inferno is filled with real people who were political enemies and all sorts of other things.
So
it's a great way to get it.
It's recycled, and he did those kind of things with a realistic is the word. It's Hell with hearing, seeing, feeling as if it was Earth, because you have your senses going on what everything is happening in Hell. Yeah. It's not a dreamy, filmy illusion. It's the real hard copy kind of thing. And so I'd recommend that book, and I'm sure it's in Sawyer Free Library. You've got more.
Only because when I said that sounds like how Olin Butler writes. So he has, I think, a 4-series mystery
Oh, yeah.
What's his name? Kit. Hold on.
A character that has.
Is that
Christopher.
one of them?
Yes, this
Yeah.
is the first in the series, and it's Christopher Marlowe Cobb. He's a journalist. His nickname is Kit, and it takes place in World War I. But this book happens to take place in Mexico, and then the next one is Istanbul, and then I don't know where the third one is. The fourth one's in Paris. But he starts when he. Let me just skip back. After reading this, one of the things that Wayne pointed out that led me to this book was that he talks about emotion. Like he says, you have to write. Everything that we write is an emotional experience, and the emotion is based on our senses.
Yes.
So it's like how to include those senses in that experience, the internal, the external,
Right.
Blah, blah, blah. So
Just a writer, an example for writers out there. You're writing already, you're writing already a little bit, and you say something like, your character was embarrassed. And that's what you write.
Yeah,
The character
yeah.
was embarrassed. Olin Butler, and you're following it, is going to say he or she felt their cheek redden and their heart rate, or whatever, something that would respond to and
Cold sweat.
would describe embarrassment.
Yeah, so
Instead of
The sensation.
just the summary statement.
yeah, he calls them it's a sensual experience. So you have that reaction inside your body, the sensual response, because it gets teased a lot of comments about that, outside of your body, flashes of the past, insight into the future, and then what's happening around you, what's in the environment. So I thought, well, that sounds really good.
Yeah.
I struggle with that. I just struggle with it. Because
Well,
how
you-
many times can your heart beat fast?
Yeah.
I mean, your heart's beating.
Oh, I know.
If you're writing something, your heart's always beating fast.
Right.
If you're in this situation or this experience, that. So I want to see what he does. I want to see the proof in his pudding.
You tell us more about this hot country.
The hot
but
country.
the Paris, the
Paris
fourth one,
one.
Paris, I vouch for. I read that,
Yeah.
and it's good. And happily, there's a character in there from Gloucester, Massachusetts.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, he's in Paris, but there's a nurse that he fancies, and she's, of course, Gloucester girl, right? She's from Gloucester, Massachusetts. And describe a little more. I wrote him a fan letter and said it's a good book, and it's so I'm from Gloucester, and I wondered how he got why it, this character's from Gloucester, what his connection was with Gloucester, and he never wrote back.
Well, just watch him on YouTube. Maybe he's writing about it.
That's right.
So I started reading the book, and I got halfway through the first page, and I had the worst headache.
Oh, no.
I was pounding. It was so dense. The writing was
Wow.
so dense. But the book you were describing, the crash in the beginning and blah, blah, blah. It's starting in the middle of something. And I stopped writing. I stopped reading it. Emailed Wayne and said, "Are you kidding me? I had a splitting headache, and I'm only halfway through the first page. I'm not reading this guy." And then a few days went by, and I said, "Okay, I can do this. I can do this." So because he's a very quick pace, and he jumps here, there, and everywhere, and you have to really almost work at figuring out what he's saying. But it ends up, once you get the flow of it, it's good. I hope I'm not saying bad about him, but I got so involved and so engaged in it, I couldn't look for any proof in his pudding. I couldn't read it for entertainment and read it for an example of what he's saying, how he's saying you should write. So after I read it, then I thought, there's got to be something in there, and I'm still not convinced it's all him.
You can read it, but I want to ask George before you do.
Yeah.
Do you have this feeling? People are out there reading books by Hemingway and others, and Robert Owen Butler, and they're feeling I should write like this, and they're models.
Oh, yeah.
And it turns out you don't write like that. Do you believe, as I do, that even Hemingway and even Robert Owen Butler really wrote one book at a time? They learned how to write that book when they wrote that book.
I see. Yeah,
it didn't even really help them model or do anything for the next
Right.
book that they wrote. Is that also your experience?
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
All right.
I mean, if you have enough there's enough internal driving, then, I mean, the difficult thing is you're always being a writer
Yeah.
and you need something, the inner core of something, pushes your unconscious, subconscious, whatever geographic place you want to put it around your conscious mind. That does it. And, if it's starting to tell a story and starting to find out what the story is, and you only find out, there are people who actually edit say and then say it, but I sense that sometimes in things I read, and I actually don't like that.
Where's the fun in that?
Well,
so you want this path of
even,
telling that story.
Yeah.
And trusting it enough, and this gets back to just write a first draft. I mean, just write and see what it is.
Yeah.
And paired with that, you'll discover something wonderful. But paired with that is the ability to
Throw it out.
It goes back to what Susie said about message books. Message books are harder to read because they're not open to. It might be something else other than be kind to your neighbors. It's all right.
Well, also with
Each person's
kids'
gonna get
books,
his
I
own
mean,
message.
this is really irritating me in life. Is that I know people who are publishing kids' books, and they really are message books. I mean, and
It's like, we have an issue here.
we have
Who
an
can write a
issue.
book about this?
Let's make people.
Can we just have lovely literature that makes kids enjoy the book?
Well,
That's where I'm coming from.
If you're a
Webb.
decent person, it may make you actually open to the experience of different kinds of people and other thoughts and experiences and stuff like that. But to say that I'm going to write a kid's book, so I'm going to teach a kid to not hate, that has so many assumptions which are so kind of dangerous.
I'm sorry.
It makes. I think it can make bad books, or at best kind of a pedestrian book. But also, it's making a really cruel assumption about how people's. I think people. What is it? The Anne Frank thing. That deep down, everyone's really good at heart. I mean, you have to kind of believe that about your readers.
Trust your readers. Trust your readers. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think one of the greatest non-message books that had a powerful message, just for an example of a book that really, really works, is The Little House by Virginia Lee Burton.
Isn't it? Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I mean, that stands on its own. And then you think of all the values that you're drinking in as you're doing that. It's, nature and taking care of something that was beloved, all of those things. And it wasn't with a hammer. Bung, bung, bung.
Yeah, and I carried, before I had anything to do with Gloucester, I loved that book. And I loved it, spending, at the age of 6, I was a large, it was a large city. It's Chicago. It's a gigantic city. But I was just in a kind of residential house neighborhood. And then I moved to a suburb, and I really had no experience. I mean, I'd been to New York City, and I'd been to downtown Chicago and stuff. But I certainly knew nothing about Virginia Lee Burton and stuff. But I adored that book.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just there's so many layers of experience
Exactly.
about. It's not just about urban planning.
Right, exactly.
It's about life. It's about
But coming home, it's about
coming home. This little house and
It's-
a big city growing up around it, and then at the end, and the big city isn't all that terrible either. But it's its own thing. But then it goes home. It's a universal story, and it can be used for all sorts of messages. But that's not where it starts.
Yes.
I mean, that's not where the writer starts, and it's not where readers start.
That's the wonder of it, to be able to share a vision with other people in a book. And you didn't have to move from Chicago, or you got that in opening pages and absorbing them. tell us now, Laura?
Well, I don't
more
know.
about.
It's like we're jumping from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean.
Okay,
We're jumping
good.
from
Let's
one
go for
thing
it.
to another. All right, but in the 3 minutes we have left. So, this
24 seconds.
right. So I wanted to see an example, and now as they're talking about her book, I can see the pages, and I'm trying to read it in my head.
Yeah.
But I'm sure it's not connected to this. But anyway, so Olin Butler, his point about the writing from an emotion, and describing that. So, and I wanted to find.
Good.
So here's one I found that has the inside, the outside, the environment, the future, the past. Too much of a hell of a story. I was racing too fast inside. My hands weren't working like they should. The goddamn button wouldn't go. Wouldn't go. Were my hands trembling? Hell no. Well, maybe. Voices. I clenched in my chest. I unbent a little, though my hand stayed where it was, still struggling with the button. The voices passed. He wouldn't come with the heralding of voices. He would be alone. He would appear suddenly at the door. He could appear at any moment. I didn't like this. It felt like goddamn stage fright, which I had once as a very young man, going on the stage for the first time, to carry a spear, to open a carriage door, something. I felt like that. I'd rather face machine gun fire than this. The machine gun fire is coming up.
Oh,
But anyway,
wow.
but I just thought,
Yeah.
that was, because it's so hard.
Good example.
Yeah, it was a good example.
Oh, I love that
Yeah.
because I can feel that sort of desperate, time pressure and the button.
Well, you know what he was doing? He was, as a journalist, he was in somebody's saddlebag, like this guy that he was following, the German emissary, the emissary from Germany to Mexico. He was in his saddlebag trying to find out what the story was, what he was coming to say. So he's in a boxcar on a train, sneaking in, trying to fiddle through and try to get everything, find what he wants, find the papers that he wants, and get out safely, but without having the guy know that he was in there rummaging around. And he's all finished, and he's trying to button the thing back up.
Wow.
And then that happened. Anyway.
And
so,
now I,
that's it.
under the pressure of time, as the sands of time thwart me, we don't know what will. And I'm not a writer, but I play one on television, and people are, any moment this plug is going to be pulled, and I won't have another opportunity to speak until the next show. So I'm going to say thank you all for being here today and taking part in a very lively discussion. And keep reading and keep writing. What else can we say?
Yeah. And illustrate.
And
don't be
illustrate.
afraid to illustrate.
Yeah, that's right.
And draw and doing them all at the same time.
At the same time.
Yeah.
Excellent. If you can juggle it. I'm not going to tell my story about jugglers. Okay. You have to wait till next time. Thank you very much. Good luck and good traveling.
Tuolla Lontoossa Jennin mä kohtasin. Halo Vepi, oho. Hän on neidosten joukossa kaunihin. Halo Vepi, oho. Suukon kirsikka silmät niin mustat kuin yö. Ja ne loisti kuin tuikkiva tähtien työ.